All right, now we get ready for Playground to Podium.
Yep, that's right. And I'll be chatting with Marissa Gibson Bailey, who is a sports scientist and exercise physiologist. And live from South Africa, we have Norman Mpake, who is the executive director and co-founder of the Physical Education Institute and Sport Association. Good morning and welcome.
Morning. Good morning, Carrie. Good morning, New Yorkers.
Morning.
Hi, Norman.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you. Now, what time is it over there, Norman?
It's exactly 1:26 in the afternoon.
All right. Well, good afternoon to you, and thank you for joining us. So
Yes.
I wanna jump to you first, Norman. Briefly tell us about the PEISA and your work with the United Nations and the current agenda called Design to Move.
Oh, okay. So let's start backwards. So the Physical Education Institute and Sports Association is actually a multinational agency. So all the graduates, the African graduates from the international school that we all attended, are members of this organization. But it stems out of the initial organization, which was the Physical Education Institute of South Africa, whereby we were an advocacy and sector mobilization organization working with the Department of Education to advance physical education within the country. So we've evolved from just being a South African-based organization to a continental organization. And in that period, when it was still the Physical Education Institute of South Africa, we did certain projects, and one of the projects was Design to Move, which was a global project that was run or initiated by Nike Global. That project then grew into the work that was done by the United Nations, UNESCO, which is Quality Physical Education Policy Revision Project. So I then was appointed as the national coordinator for the UNESCO Quality Physical Education Project, which was to try and address the policy gaps within the country to make them a bit more inclusive, to ensure that all children had access to physical education. And so that was the work, but we still work very closely with the National Commission of UNESCO within the country around issues of sports and physical education. So the evolution of PACER to PACER is that it was just physical education before, and now it's physical education and sports, because in other African countries, their focus is more towards sports rather than physical education. And so our intention is to make sure that there's a balanced development of both sports and physical education in all the African countries that we are in, which are currently 39.
And Marissa, you're a superstar here. How did you make the connection with Norman?
Norman and I went to school together in Cuba. It's my best friend, one of my best friends. We studied in Cuba together, and where great minds meet, we always used to have heated debates about what we did in class, and I always used to use Trinidadian language to him, and he was just amazed by it. So I think that friendship, because of language, because of culture, joined us together, kept us together today, and many other students from around the world that went to school in Cuba with us. We are still connected.
Now, being that you have formed this connection, how does it work on a professional level now, as pertains to the PEISA?
Well, basically, Norman is here today to consolidate the fact that physical education is really, really important. If you notice, I didn't talk about sport because most people would think that it goes hand in hand.
Right.
And I think that it's very important that we speak to physical education as a standalone so that you understand the nature, the feature of it, and how the sport actually linked it. Not just only sport, but health and fitness, sports science. How does all these different aspects and features are attached or linked to physical education?
And Norman, there's a challenge in this era that most people don't understand nor appreciate the value of physical education as a subject or area of study, and even worse, undermine and diminish the worth or importance of professions such as the physical education teacher. What do you both have to say about this?
I'll let Norman go first.
All right. One of the most important things that I'd like to highlight is that the challenges that you face in Trinidad and Tobago are not isolated to just that country. The nature of physical education in its own right creates a predicament within education setting, in that it's actually one of the few, if you compare it with the arts, that are more practical and not theory based. But that does not mean it doesn't have any theory. So the challenge becomes people often misunderstand the educational value of physical education and look at the physical value of physical education because you can directly link it to just physical activity. And so those predicaments are not new. These are very old things that have happened generation to generation. And the funny part is that every society, as it changes and transforms and evolves, actually the model of physical education changes with it because it's a social subject. Remember, it's one of those that allow children to express themselves emotionally, to test their own capacity to do certain things. And so it's dependent on the learners and the generation that you're faced with and the intention of the country or the curriculum at that particular time. And I often joke about how English sometimes complicates meaning. So in Spanish, it's called la educación física, which education precedes the physical component. But in English, it's called physical education, which then we obsess about the first word, which is the physical part, and ignore the surname, which is education.
Right.
And one of the things that we often say is that before you become a physical education teacher, you actually have to be a teacher first. So you're a teacher before you specialize in physical education. And that is part of the things that people often fail to appreciate and take cognizance of. And lastly, the one of the elements is that I think we'll discuss it as we go on, is that most of the time, because sports is complete, in that it's not broken up in segments, it has its rules. You know that there's 10 people that are going to play at a certain time. These are the rules, and everybody knows it's inaccessible. It often, because of its accessibility and its simplicity, somehow over supersedes its role within the education space. So then people often assume that by doing sports, you've already covered the element of physical education, whereby they fail to do the assessment. So I often say to people, if you do a physical activity, it's fine. You can do your play, you can play your sports, you can do anything. But in physical education, if there's no assessment, then it's just either recreation, either it's play or it's sports. As long as there's no assessment, because within education, you need to assess if a learner has demonstrated their understanding of and their ability to do certain things. So that is what differentiates physical education and the other physical activities, is that because it's education-based, it has to be followed in an educational manner. The difference is that because there's activities involved, people often lose sight of that element, the education element of it.
I'll say this as well, Carrie.
Yeah.
What I always tell students that I interact with is that physical education, you look at the two words separately. Education is really a process. It's a process of learning and teaching. And look at physical, it's about learning about your body, learning about your body, everything about your body, whether it is mental, cognitive, physical, physiological, right? But then how does that body interact with the different segments of physical activity?
Right.
And we mentioned physical activity in our previous interviews, that it's either play, it's either sport, it's either recreation, it's either activities of daily living, it's either games. So involving in any of these 5 different categories, and how does your body interact, whether you want to use sport in order to develop, to become an athlete, or you want to engage in recreation, you want to engage in play, right? You now have to analyze these different aspects to know exactly whether, how you are going to develop as a person. We focus on sport as the only physical activity and not recognizing that the base or foundation of sport, of all these other physical activity, is physical education. And there's so much more to physical education in itself, right, that we lose sight of the differentiation and we just lump everything into one.
Yep, that's right. And well, you've answered my next question, how important it is. And with that, I want to thank you both for joining us this morning and giving us this very, very important information and emphasizing on the importance of physical education itself as the basis of all education on sport and fitness and everything along those lines. So I want to thank you so much, Marissa Gibson-Bailey, sports scientist and exercise physiologist. And live from South Africa, I want to thank you as well, Norman
No.
Pake, Executive Director and co-founder of the Physical Education Institute and Sports Association, PESA. All right, thank you so much. We are now going to take a short break, and when we come back, there's going to be some entertainment news, so stay with us.